And it's a bit tough to figure out this common question, but because in a way, as I was saying, Laine and Liisa had this interesting debate going on about this Soviet background and foreground, and then Adomas sort of, transpositioned this whole issue into a different realm of temporality and untimeliness. But Liisa knows this. This is sort of my favorite question that I nevertheless try to sort of adapt here. And this is about the relationship between what is socialist or Soviet and what is modernist. And really, I think, Laine, in your paper, what I noticed was this this question really about this genuine experience, or authentic experience, this desire for authentic experience. So how much is this really a kind of a reaction to the socialist situation, or as you were saying, this kind of building of the building of the new man, and how much is it like this general reaction to modernity and this kind of mass society, which was pretty much, the basis of the Soviet socialism, but nevertheless, it is something that is more globally happening. And if we look at like hippie movement in the West, it's very much, the similar desire for this authenticity. So is there, to make this difference, is it important for you, and do you see that there, maybe this? And then Liisa, a similar question to you, because I'm thinking this city, that you pose and that you show, and we've discussed this with you before, because this is something, as I said, it was one of my favorite questions. That really, how much is this city? How do you? Is it something like that can be a basis for, let's say, a broader comparative history that straddles East-West division? Because if we look at the series of these images that you put up in the very beginning of the pollutionist group and Okas and Navakas, you can actually broaden this. You can bring in some Eastern Bloc artists, and then you can go to look at Western artists who are doing the same thing at the same time, sort of reacting to this modernity and something that becomes visible in urban space that we tend to characterize as the post-industrial city, or the emergence of the post-industrial, something along the line. So how much is there? How do you see this division line between socialist and modernist? And it's of course very difficult in your case, but nevertheless, I'm very interested in that. Is it because you mentioned this? You mentioned this relationship to its own time through this kind of infrastructure. Nevertheless, the materials, the TV studio, the lighting, this kind of. How much do you consider this as this kind of untimeliness? I understand your idea of untimeliness. Is it reacting both against the socialist modernity and the more global modernity? Is it untimely vis-a-vis both sides in a way?
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, okay, you answered the question. Thank you. Let's go on. So that's in a way my interest here. Maybe you could also expand a bit.
Yes. So so what was the question? So talking about these overlapping, quest for answers to existential questions, definitely. When we look at the hippie movement, of course, it was booming. It was a global phenomenon, sort of, if we see that this globality consists of the West and the East. But there was also a certain, I would say, appropriation, because these ideas, sometimes they were appropriated only superficially by the form and not so much by the content. But what then happened was probably that through this experience, the content also came along. Like in the case, for example, of Andris Greenberg's, he later in the interviews, he somehow rejected that he was given this kind of key role as somehow as a flagman of the hippie movement in Latvia. But he said that, no, I was just experimenting, and not just, but of course, I was experimenting with the fashion design, because he came from the circles of the fashion design, and that he saw them as his models that he could then somehow mold and somehow frame into these hippie appearances, and that he was making these costumes or really like the clothing. And so it is also sort of a reference that no, it was only superficial. I was interested in the form. But then eventually when he got to his performance art, actually this performance art was also very anthropocentric, and this sexual liberalization, of course, was very crucial to him and to his circles, and it also comes up on several times in the interviews where they say that yes, that was somehow crossing the border. That was also illegal. That could also be very easily criminalized. They knew, they were aware of it, but nevertheless, this was also seen as a form of sort of taking away, ripping off this mask, and as Greenberg said, the body became the only autonomous zone, something that could not be controlled or taken away from me. So this nudity was celebrated not only as this kind of hippie liberalization movement of sexuality and this cherishing of more liberal forms of gender and sex, etc. But also as this kind of experience of more authentic way of life. As regards these parallels between the West and of course, yes, I do also see that in both cases, although we can analyze this kind of reciprocity between the artist and the system, in both cases we see that these movements or reactions, which then reverberate within the art, are built on antagonistic impulses. So whether they are articulated very loudly or whether they are miniature, this of course then depends on the context, but definitely there is some kind of an antagonism going on and going against something, whether it's capitalism or whether it's a totalitarian regime.
Yeah, thanks. I'll ask you more. But Liisa, do you want to also say a few words about this division?
So I think it's kind of dangerous to place these artists that I talked about, under the new urban culture into this wider Western art historical framework, because then they automatically, become the small brothers of Situationist International, which was already there at the end of 1950s, and this is something that I therefore do not want to do, because of course these ideas are kind of similar. They are, about taking back the city. But still in the Soviet Union, we kind of have to look at it separately, because there we know that at the end of 1950s, we still talk about the early signs of the thaw. So these processes were belated by these the inner dynamics of the Soviet Union. So in that sense, I think it's dangerous, but also I don't know what we could kind of gain from it. So I would therefore really prefer to look at it as a special case in the Soviet Union.
Thank you. Adomas, do you want to?
Yeah, I actually, Liisa just stepped on all of the toes of my thesis. I would be curious to think with this idea of belatedness a little bit more and kind of displace maybe this chronological approach to those specific movements, just because something happened in New York or Amsterdam that is, or Paris in this case, that is similar in form or in its social kind of dynamic. I think it still leaves us space and agency for those particularities to be written through and narrated as ones that have agency and are not derivatives of something that has happened. And I think actually, Liisa, you are actually saying that, because you're saying the Soviet Union is a special case, and exactly what happens in relation between these artists and the broader totalitarian regime is that dynamic is exactly that untimely moment that then can be narrated. And that would be my kind of methodological approach. And then it can be, from a position of strength, it can be put on back to the Western context, but not from this, oh, look, we're just kind of, doing also situationist stuff, but like belated, But no, actually we're doing something, but it's slightly different. And you have to accept this modification as something that's really important. So that would be my kind of position in terms of that. And also something, a little bit of a provocation in relation to Andris Grinbergs as well. Before I was doing this MA, I somehow was commissioned to write a little text for a non-academic journal about broadly desire in Soviet Vilnius. And I somehow ended in this kind of non-academic, basically Google research about the hippie communities in late 60s and early 70s in Lithuania. And I wonder if that's the case with Andris Grinbergs, but I heard some rumors from some Latvian artists that it might be, that actually those hippie communities, again, were kind of hippies in form, but the content was very much, not to say that actually the Western equivalent wasn't patriarchal, but that the structures in place were actually extremely patriarchal. Don't want to say anything about Andris Grinbergs because I don't know enough, but I've heard people who saw his documentations of his performances. I think one of it's called Sex. It was sent to Jonas Mekas and so on, and I've heard it's problematic. There is just this kind of, from again, what I've heard is that there's an element of submission to this male figure in that kind of sexually explicit, kind of performative happening act. So that's what I've heard.
And I can affirm, so that you don't have to really refer to rumors, it's indeed already written down and studied that this, what we often refer as a countercultural avant-garde, or whatever practices in this Soviet culture, unfortunately, they very often, I mean, maybe in 99%, develop this patriarchal order, where the question of the male genius is never questioned, when the status of a female muse is never questioned, right? And maybe this is also the reason, Laine, what do you think, that today we actually hear of so little women in this panel, in these three panels, right? We always have these art collectors, are again men, right? So why do we still leave out? Where are these women? Even when we discuss this kind of these spheres of art, which are supposedly to be more free, more liberated, more Western, etc. So yes, thank you very much for this regard and for this feminist intervention, which is warming up of our discussion tomorrow. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's something. It's a pity that Katrin Kivimäe is not here, who has actually addressed this issue in the past. And one of the things that I think she has said is really the issue of the discourse of unofficial art that goes back already to the 70s, which in a way subsumes all other issues and kind of, you know, thrones the discourse. And in a way we are still dealing with, in some sense, how to work through that, or how to kind of undo it and bring up all the other injustices that were sort of hidden underneath that. And I think it's a very, I hope tomorrow we hear more on that. I feel that we now should open it to the public and hear more from the other side. You know, this is super interesting. Today we started with this question. Somebody started in the first panel that we were hoping for an informal seminar, and it was all set up in this kind of, juxtapositional way, that we have the audience and we have the speakers, and it's becoming more like conference. So in a way now, let's turn it. Let's undo it. Let's turn it there. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question to Laine, because I also see some, like, just as Jana posed also her remarks, there is some like kind of contrast, or like really not really historic clear picture between, like, if we assume that there was some Homo Sovieticus, which I also would be more interested if you identify what is this Homo Sovieticus, because I don't see this, like, what is the role of individuals in this Homo Sovieticus, but then that we ascribe democratic principles to the counterculture or to these alternative communities forming at the times, or circles of performance artists working, because as Jana just pointed out, they were quite patriarchal, they were also hierarchical. It was the same with Rundale carnivals, that it was a certain hierarchical structure. So I don't think we can project to unofficial culture or these informal cells immediately that they carry some democratic principles within themselves, because they were conditioned by different ideological aspects, not by the state ideology, but like by the prevalent ideological aspects of the time.
Yeah, I know. And, often I feel like guilty that I'm writing sort of, from this male perspective, and I'm cherishing the male geniuses, and I know this, I'm totally aware of it. But then again, of course, this is not a recipe for one right answer, but maybe I'm also somehow indoctrinated, and I'm hoping for a better future or a better explanation or interpretation retrospectively of what happened. But yes, I do agree that most likely we can assume that this hierarchy was going on, and especially Greenberg's was and is especially narcissistic, egocentric person. But who am I to blame? I mean, there were several couples working in Latvian performance scene, and that's also interesting, that the husband and wife were part of this circle, and this is something that we could observe. Whether this central catalyst was a male figure, yes, we can look at it from this deconstructed position, or from the perspective of a gender. That's possible. So I would rather say that, of course, maybe I'm too provocative with offering too easy answers, but at some point it is one perspective of how we could look at these experiences, and I'm sure that all this field is very paradigmatic. It really depends on what kind of goggles we put on, and then it depends on the method, and therefore I would say that it's open to other interpretations as well, definitely.
I also wanted actually just to quickly jump in the Homo Sovieticus. I mean, I always knew that Homo Sovieticus is this that is coined by Alexander Zinoviev during Perestroika, and actually I think what you were saying is this new Soviet man ideology, which comes from the 20s.
Yeah, it starts, there is a certain genealogy and certain transformation of these ideas. And definitely, yes, Homo Sovieticus is a term which is specific term. And actually this new man, that was this post-romantic version, and that was part of actually not only a Soviet totalitarian regime, but any authoritarian regime. We could see the emergence of, first of all, this ideal new man, so the ideal values and ideal role model. But then eventually, of course, we realized that over this experiment spanning for half a century, no ideal man or woman was created. And actually, this is also this kind of critical aspect of Homo Sovieticus, that what we have is not somebody whom we can see as a role model, but rather somebody who is really, who lacks critical thinking, who is obedient, who is part of our society even now. And we brought up this discussion on the Victory Monument, and we saw what happened there on the 9th of May and on the 10th of May, and what we see is the reality. So we can, again, we can have this question open. So what is this, the consequence of Homo Sovieticus experiment?
There's a recent book by, do you know, by Gulnaz Sharafutinova, who is written about Homo Sovieticus, like, in a very critical, I mean, kind of critical towards this term. So it's just come out. So I really suggest to look at others also who are interested in that. Okay, now Krista, yes, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Very, very interesting panel, really, indeed. Thank you. So, but I particularly am thankful to Adomas, because I think he asked a very important question and very, very strictly, because it wasn't asked today. And this is, how do we actually approach what was happening? How do we approach our history of art and culture? And I think that for very long times, for very various reasons, it was approached from outside, really. And we appropriated the models of interpreting our culture as with the eyes of the others, you know, and adopting this to our own interpretation. I think this must and has, of course, already been turned around, the question, because cultures happened here and now. And they also happened here and now in 60s, 70s. And I think that the second thing that must be actually stressed here is that culture communicate. This is the normal life of cultures. They communicate, and they take over or borrow. This was the older vocabulary of this. They are influenced. They borrow what they need. So they do it according to their own needs. And this is why they produce something different, because they can translate. They translate all the time the ideas from here and there. But they do it because they have this own history, own traditions, own mythologies, memoirs, and so on. So I think this is very needed approach. And only then we can actually compare if we have done this kind of work. So thank you.
Was there a question, or it was just a comment?
If you want to respond.
Oh, do you want to respond? Is that maybe?
Thank you.
So Rebecca, Gregor, Triin, Linda. So that's the. Yeah, Laima. Okay. You have the microphone.
I got one. Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting to listen. And I wanted to ask Adomas, because I really like this idea of timelessness, and really not as like following some Western or like Eastern, like Moscow-centered or Leningrad art movements. But I was curious because the artists you chose, they were somehow in the margins in a way, like they were not unrecognized, so they were present. Like Shonta was important in that photography movement, but at the same time, him being queer and like also like photographing those naked guys, and and also having this part of life. Also, Anu Peder, and as I understood that she was not considered like true sculptor in terms of how we understood sculpture during the Soviet times, that like set an attitude towards materials. So she was more like sort of applied artist, considered perhaps by the community of sculptors. I don't know. You may correct me.
Rebecca may correct. Okay, she's saying, yeah.
Yeah,
I was
so,
also doing this.
Yeah, so and Ceausescu's also sort of really kind of his gaze, contrary to that, like established like male gaze, which is a lot of sort of really objectification and like magnifying, and then it's really coming somewhere from the margins, taking something from there. So I wonder whether this marginality or certain queerness has to do with timelessness, or it's just like this broader category, how you think about it. Thank you.
In my particular project, they intersect, and I think it's really generative when they intersect, but they don't have to. That's how I believe it is, but I don't know. I'm just one writer.
Thank you, everyone. It was really a fun panel, and thank you, Liisa, for mentioning queer, so I can come in myself. So actually, before I say anything, Anu Põder won a Young Artist Prize when she finished her studies, but then she sort of marginalized in a sense for a while, but then there were, I think, personal reasons for that, but she's now more in the center than ever during her life. And in Tate, very well exposed thanks to Dina Ahmedea in Tate. But so I wanted to come in with an idea about anachronism. I think using queering as a method in the 70s or 60s is anachronist, because queering as an idea wasn't there yet. And if you think of Andres Toltsi's panels with cotton textiles, I think he maybe was addressing the gender norms, but his gaze remains extremely heterosexual still. If you think of the breast on the panels that you didn't show, but that's like maybe one of the central works. So I wouldn't say he was queering it. I think he was as straight as ever, but he was aware of heterosexuality. And I think it's quite interesting to maybe compare, if we come to Adomas's work, and of how you were looking at Šontas, and now we are looking at Šonta as a queer artist, though his family is maybe not so into it. But Šonta is also documenting this kind of, well, now we say it's queerness, but actually this kind of vagueness around homosexuality that was criminalized with anti-sodomy laws in Lithuania and Estonia. It was called pederasty law. And somehow it connects to me with how Boris Mikhailov was documenting in the 60s and 70s the red of the Soviet era, that this kind of materiality is so important. And if you think of Šonta's photograph of this guy in the woods, cruising possibly, and then a piece by Andres Tolts, then the sex difference and gender difference really comes very clear, I think. And I had some ideas about the first presentation as well, but I don't want to be the only commenter, so thank you.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Do we go take more? Oh yeah, Liisa, yes.
Yeah, I think your comment is justified. It is total anachronism to talk about queering in the 1970s Soviet Estonia. Firstly, and maybe you're also right that it is perhaps it is more correct to talk about emasculating the Soviet space, but this is all still something that I think that Tolts is doing. He does something to this masculine space of Soviet modernity. With his textiles, because it is kind of, rare that the male artists are using textiles in this extensive way, don't you think?
All the Soviet art should be sort of reviewed from the perspective of gender norms. Especially, I was thinking about it when I was listening to Tom's earlier, when he was looking at the folkloristic motives in contemporary art. And then it's so important, what is like the gender norm? Like there were all these waves of reproductive campaigns, like 3 children, everyone, 5 children, 10 million children. and men and women maybe perceive this differently, and also how a Soviet man was depicted and how a Soviet woman was depicted, and what we see on the paintings and our artworks. There's like, we've been talking about it with Adomas and Inga recently, that this is how maybe we could revise the art history from the perspective of gender, yeah.
But just to add one more quick thing, because when you look at Tolts in the 70s, how he actually looked like on the photos, that was a very, he was a dandy, wearing long hair, really experimenting with clothes. So there's still something there that deserves your attention as well, I think.
So, Gregor.
Thanks. I also very much enjoyed your presentations and the discussion now. Maybe perhaps a bit of a devil's advocate question and inspired by Liisa's presentation, that I wonder how large, how wide can you stretch the idea of public space? That in a way, when you started your presentation, you said something like 1970s new urban culture emerged, and then something was happening in public space. And at the same time, why I'm asking is that, for example, this Kazakh art historian and curator artist Oksana Shatalova, she has this, she claims that in a way monumental decorative art fulfilled this Leninist utopian project of bringing art in the sense of social life, while at the same time, when we look at conceptual art and the work by Laganovskis, then the people whom it reached is very narrow, and it's debatable whether we can talk about any public for this artwork in the late Soviet period.
Again, a very good question, I think. You're right. I should have defined public space, in the Soviet context first, because it's definitely much more complex where to draw the line between public and private in the Soviet society. I do not know. And when you say that the art that I showed in my presentation was actually created for, this small circle of like-minded individuals. Yes, this is also true, although you do know that Tolts as well as Lapin were not really, unofficial artists in Estonia, in Soviet Estonia. They could actually exhibit in the public official exhibitions also. Perhaps not with all of the works that I showed today. For example, the painting series Signs by Lapin. From these works, only Rahva Hääl, as far as I know, has been in spring exhibition, whereas the rest of the series could not publicly be exhibited. And Norton Dodge actually bought it straight away, took it to the United States. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, I tried.
Just food for thought, because at the same time, pollutionists, they were widely distributed via newspapers.
But this is a very good, it's good that you brought out Pollutionists, because this series was actually made for a newspaper. So this is a public space, right? And really, I was so intrigued to hear today from Yeva that Pollutionists were actually inspired by Gustav Klutzis and his Soviet photomontages. Yeah, things are very messy actually and complex. And it's very hard to kind of draw these straight models here. Each case is different.
We have to speed it up. Sorry, I'm intervening. So Triin Metsla, and then Linda, and then I think it was all, or is there somebody who's still? So last two questions.
Yeah, thank you for the panel. I have a broader question, and we touched upon this earlier as well when Gregor Taul was having his presentation. And I would like to ask maybe Liisa and Adomas and Toms. We have talked about a lot about this kind of a Baltic cluster, or this kind of a Baltic space, or even Liisa mentioned Baltic art, and this refers to this kind of territorial closeness, maybe similarities like historical, political. But I'm wondering if we should encourage this format of like juxtaposing or comparing those territorial spaces. I remember we had here, I don't know, 2 months ago, Kersti Markus was having her presentation, and she was kind of rethinking or finding new borders for her research. So if you started your research, let's say Liisa or Adomas, or did you think about more to maybe go beyond, or when we are talking about Soviet time, let's say, as we mentioned, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, and it's kind of you don't see those kind of research very often that you compare those different regions, or that is like more further from Baltic states. And I was also wondering, let's say like Adomas, who was dealing also with more like, I don't know, contemporary art, but made still in like Soviet time. Why did you select this region, Baltic region, or could you broaden up those territorials, or is this kind of creating still this kind of a pan-Baltic space, or is there, and Liisa, when you mentioned Baltic art, is it like art made in Baltics, or like does it have like this territorial connotation? So my question is that I've really often I see that it's a very easy option, very convenient option to compare those Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and there is maybe not like the conversation doesn't go beyond that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for this question. I'll try to be really brief because we're running out of time. And yeah, this is a broad discussion for sure. My specific reasons were there were about 3 or 4 that I can name now. One is I care about this space. Second is I was curious about, and I think in the talk I tried to touch upon the formal and material aspects and social aspects that can come into a certain constellation together. So not defining the space by some sort of pseudo-mythological essentialist Balticness, God forbid, but by these formal material and social concerns that could be potentially shared between the artists in the space. And the third reason, because I forgot the fourth, is the strategic reason as well, which I think is as we're speaking in an institution, is also relevant, which is the basically which addresses the question or the fact that the ex-Yugoslav states forged their own neo-avant-garde art narratives in the 90s and 2000s. Russia obviously forged its conceptualist narrative, and strategically, for some of the reasons that were mentioned this morning by, I think, someone sitting just there at that particular moment in time, particularly now, it's incredibly important to have this shared voice strategically as well. So these three reasons, but I think the second one is the most important, and the fourth, actually remember the fourth, is if we were to broaden it, I wouldn't broaden it to the socialist states, and I really dislike when there is this broadening between incorporated into the Soviet Union and the socialist states, because it's historically, socially such different spaces. And that's, if I have one fault with the Baltic Triennial 14, which is otherwise brilliant, if Valentinas and Joao will be watching this, it's that they are homogenizing the socialist and the Soviet. So I would actually go and think about solidarities with other marginal ethnic minorities in the Soviet space, rather than Poland or Hungary and so on.
A lot of the important things were just said. I won't repeat, but I so agree that after the 24th of February, having this Baltic perspective is not comfortable. It's about it's a political strategy that we now need more than we probably needed before February 24th. But also, in my own research, I haven't really used the Baltic perspective so much. But instead, I have used in my PhD dissertation actually the regionality that I was using there was the Western Soviet Union. So I actually took Moscow, as a comparison point to the Baltic late Soviet art to the game as well. But as we know now, this comparison is tabooed, so it's so much more complicated to use kind of this regionality that we also tried to do with Ono and Jane in our exhibition. You saw what turned out: empty hall, empty walls, right? So I still, I think that the Baltic perspective now has a political meaning. Yeah.
Thank you, Liisa. Do you want to?
No.
Or we? So, Linda, please.
Yeah, just really briefly, I also wanted to problematize this use of Homo semioticus, Sovieticus, because that's, I think it brings in so many Cold War stereotypes and this gaze upon the inhabitants of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe as this grey mass without agency, without individuality. But I also have a positive program. So I think like looking at the 1970s, perhaps one of the ways to make it more concrete would be not to link just to the developments in the 1920s, but to the Constitution of 1977 that very explicitly states this birth of a new historical community, the Soviet people, which makes like a significant change also on the constitutional and legal level.
Yes, I definitely agree that it needs to be approached critically, and actually it's interesting, yes, to compare this discourse, the Western discourse, and I have found like articles on Homo economicus, which is obviously then the Western role model, and Homo economicus then is compared to Homo Sovieticus, which obviously then is this society consisting of humans who lack entrepreneurial spirit, etc., because they have been the produce of the system. Yes, I do understand that it's a problematic concept, to be used, and that it becomes like a generic formula of something that is hard to pin down. But my intention was actually to highlight these consequences of systematic endeavors to work with society, not with an entity consisting of individuals, but rather as a mass, as a mass without the voice, without agency. And this is, of course, very convenient for any totalitarian regime to somehow create this kind of these circumstances and these individuals. So this is where I saw hope in artistic circles, that actually despite the patriarchal system, which probably was also a result of internalized Soviet values, because they were also the produce of this, or it's a harsh word to say produce, but they were part of it for the better or for the worse. But perhaps yes, these patriarchal values were somehow internalized. But then again, if we look from the point of view of nowadays, how we use design thinking, how we speak about performance management in corporative environments, how we think of designing special social processes and how it will increase efficiency, this is then again like another perspective that indeed, yes, we just have a different neoliberal environment, but we still continue thinking about social design in one way or another, for one purpose or another. So I think that is maybe interesting to think about.
Okay, I think we have to close it here. Otherwise, we will be talking very long. I want to thank everybody, all the panelists. I think one of the subtopics we didn't manage to address is really the models for Soviet writing about Soviet period art in the Baltics. And I was trying to figure out some kind of a catchy slogan to kind of bring it together. I think, maybe we can tomorrow continue, but what I was thinking that I think in the 70s and 80s, this model of unofficial art stated that Soviet art or Baltic art vis-a-vis the West is different. So we are different vis-a-vis the West. Then I think in the 90s there was this desire to see the connections and similarities, and that carried on to the early 2000s. But I think now we are sort of approaching this maybe a decolonial point where we say that you are different, and maybe that is the thing to kind of proceed or kind of think forward. Anyway, thank you also audience for putting up with this very long discussion and for your all very interesting questions. And tomorrow is another day.